The old house on Harrow Hill had always been a place of mystery and dread. Its looming presence had cast a shadow over the town for generations, and no one could remember a time when the windows weren't shattered, the paint wasn't peeling, and the once manicured gardens weren't choked with weeds. People whispered about the house's dark history, tales of unspeakable deeds committed within its decaying walls. Its looming presence had cast a shadow over the town for generations, and no one could remember a time when the windows weren't shattered, the paint wasn't peeling, and the once manicured gardens weren't choked with weeds. Yet, despite the town's collective fear, no one dared to venture inside. That is, until the day she arrived. Eleanor had always been a wanderer, drawn to the unknown and unafraid of the darkness that lay hidden in the world's corners. She had heard the stories of the house on Harrow Hill and decided to make it her home. She had no family, no ties to the town, and no fear of the house's ominous reputation. On her first night in the house, Eleanor lay in the creaking bed, her eyes fixed on the moonlight seeping through the tattered curtains. She could hear the house breathing, its time-worn walls shifting and settling. It was as if the very soul of the house had taken notice of its new inhabitant. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor began to explore her new home. She moved cautiously through the dusty rooms, her fingers trailing along the cracked wallpaper. In the basement, Eleanor discovered a room filled with ancient books and crumbling manuscripts. They spoke of rituals and incantations, of summoning and binding. It was a dark and forbidden knowledge that sent shivers down her spine, yet she couldn't tear herself away. She began to study the texts, drawn deeper into their arcane secrets. As the days passed, Eleanor noticed strange occurrences in the house. Objects moved of their own accord, and whispers echoed in the empty corridors. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive presence. But Eleanor welcomed these manifestations, believing they were the house's way of communicating with her. One night, as she delved deeper into the forbidden texts, Eleanor uncovered a ritual that promised power beyond imagination. It required a sacrifice, a life offered willingly to the forces that lurked in the shadows. She hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. Eleanor knew she had to find a willing participant, someone who shared her thirst for the unknown. She ventured into town, where she met Samuel, a man as drawn to the darkness as she was. His eyes held a haunted look, and he spoke of a longing for something more, something beyond the ordinary. She invited him to the house on Harrow Hill, where she shared the ancient texts and the promise of unimaginable power. Samuel was entranced by the knowledge, and he agreed to be the willing sacrifice. The night of the ritual arrived, and the house seemed to come alive with anticipation. Eleanor and Samuel stood in the dimly lit basement, surrounded by candles and symbols drawn in blood. The air was charged with an otherworldly energy, and the shadows in the room seemed to writhe and whisper. Eleanor began the incantation, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. Samuel closed his eyes and offered himself to the forces they had invoked. But when the ritual was over, and the last echoes of incantation had faded, Eleanor realized the true horror of what they had unleashed. Samuel's body lay lifeless on the floor, but his soul was not at rest. It hovered above him, a dark, shapeless specter filled with anger and despair. Eleanor had not gained the power she sought. Instead, she had unleashed a malevolent force that hungered for vengeance. She had sought power and knowledge in the darkness, but instead, she had unleashed a horror that would haunt the town for generations to come. The house had claimed her, body and soul, and it would continue to feed on the souls of the living, a malevolent force that would never be satisfied.